This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by new Intruvix 2 herbicide from FMC. New Intruvix 2 herbicide is an all-in-one formulation that gives you the best of both worlds, fast-burning activity and long-lasting systemic action for more consistent broadleaf control pre-seed to cereals. See your local retailer today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 at Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Wednesday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your work day, and a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. Well, we're in Orlando, Florida today. Yes, enjoying the Sunshine State. We're at the National Cattlemen and Beef Association CattleCon Convention, which is really one of my favorite meetings of the year. It's great to be down here in Florida, which is obviously a huge cattle-producing state here in the United States. And looking forward to bringing you coverage, not only on this show, but at RealAgriculture.com throughout the week and into next. We've got a great show for you here today. We'll be joined by Nathan Phinney. He is the chair of the Canadian Cattle Association. We're going to talk about some of the things that happened at yesterday's trilateral meeting. We're also going to talk, and the trilateral meeting is between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico U.S. beef officials. We're also going to be talking today to Ann Wasko. Of course, she does the beef market update every 2 weeks. She's joining us here on this Wednesday. She is also here on location tomorrow, actually celebrating a very, very special day. So we'll talk to her about that as well. We'll get a bit of a beef market update from a Canadian perspective. We'll also be joined by Don Close. He is with Terrain, and we're going to talk about what's happening in the global trade arena and what are some of the things that Don is following when it comes to trade, domestic demand, export demand. Are there any differences when it comes to the type of cuts and where demand is shaping up? I always like talking to Don. We always do an interview kind of once a year here at the Cattle Convention, so it's great to connect with him here. If you do have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course you can find us across all the different social media platforms. You can also call the RealAg feedback line. The number is 855-776-6147. Tomorrow we'll be broadcasting from the Alltech booth. Yeah, we'll be doing the show kind of old school on the trade show floor down at the Alltech booth. So big thanks to Alltech for having Real Agriculture and RealAg Radio down here with them. And of course, we're going to talk to a lot of the Alltech people tomorrow, and really looking forward to that. So a bit of a switch around here this week. Actually, that's going to be Friday's show. Tomorrow is going to be the Farmer Rapid Fire. So they're very confusing. There's a lot happening this week with so much travel. So Alltech show will be on Friday, and tomorrow, Thursday, the regular day, will be the Farmer Rapid Fire. So no RealAg Issues panel this week on the show. Sorry, but some stuff's got to get moved. I'm looking forward to the convention this year. This is really the collection of thousands of delegates that are dedicated to the cattle industry. You know, they're either ranching, they're either, they could be stockers, or, doing some backgrounding, depending on which country you're from and the terminology used, or, they're finishing yards. And also packers here as well. So this is really the entire industry getting together in one place over the course of the week. Some people rolling in as early as like last Sunday. So a lot of meetings happening, and of course the trade show as well. And I'm broadcasting here from the media room, and it is humming. There's people in and out of here, media from really, really across North America, from agriculture, covering what is happening in the cattle markets. Okay, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to dig in here with Ann Wasko. She's going to join us, and we're going to talk about what's happening from the beef market perspective. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, broadcasting from Orlando, Florida. We're at the Keystone Agricultural Producer Meeting. We're at their annual general meeting. Now we're going to be talking to the executive director with CAP. It is Brenna Mahoney. So let's talk about CAP.
So Keystone Agricultural Producers has been around for 40 years. We're celebrating our 40th today, actually. So we're launching into our 2024 year. We're a general farm lobby association here in the province of Manitoba, representing all Manitoba farmers on issues that matter to them the most. But I think an important message to get across about what's happened over the past year with CAP is the board has been working on a new strategic plan to position us to be able to deal with the advocacy issues that we're having, to make sure that we're doing the right engagement and outreach with not only members, but the public, government, decision makers, and also making sure that we're aware of what's the regulatory modernization environment, that it's a moving target. And if we're not ready as an organization to deal with that, it doesn't matter what issue comes or what issues are currently going on, we're not going to be able to be successful in resolving them.
Have you heard of Vantage Ag? They're a manufacturer and distributor of liquid fertilizers, and they want to work with you. They want to learn more about you and your goals and build a relationship centered around high-value products and a customized approach. For more information on Vantage Ag, call Paul Sinkovich at 778-919-3370 or visit vantage.ag to get started today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, broadcasting from the NCBA Cattle Con here in Orlando, Florida. Enjoying the warm weather. And joined right now by great friend Ann Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Ann, how are you doing?
It's good to be here, Shaun. Good to see you.
Yeah, some nice warm weather. The end of January as the calendar flips to February. This is really the largest cattle convention in North America. Delegates from Mexico, Canada, and of course the United States all gather together to discuss all things that are happening in the beef markets. A lot happening right now. I guess from your perspective, what are you looking forward to this week finding out?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of things going on just at the convention itself, but also from a market perspective. We've got some big reports coming out, one of them this afternoon in terms of the U.S. cattle inventory report, and then even just looking broader from a market perspective going out into the first part of February, we've got the next cattle and feed report and another grain report. They're going to give us a good view of what to expect in these markets to start off 2024. But at the same time, there is so much more to see here at convention. We're going to hear about weather. We're going to, and of course, that's something that's on our mind if we live in Western Canada. In a lot of parts, not just us, but certainly personally, we'll be looking at that. But all kinds of things, the sustainability meetings, some of the the political meetings that are going on in terms of trade, all the rest of it. So there is so much that really they cover every gamut here. There's always something to see and always something going on.
Yeah, and we're recording this from the media room, and you've run into you got more friends here than I do, which is a lot of people talking about some of the same stuff. I think there's a lot of questions about 24, and one of the ones that I've heard a lot in this room here this morning is questions about can we sustain demand based on the supply that we have in front of us.
Yeah, that is on everyone's mind, especially with inflation still, granted slowing, but still very much sticky, if you will. The interest rate impact still out there. Just what's going on as consumers are dealing with these higher costs. So demand is at the forefront, especially here in 24, until we get past some of these questions about how things unfold, and not just here in the U.S., in Asian countries, South American countries, us in Canada. So that's a big, I won't say stickler, but certainly a focus that everybody's on. And we don't have some good answers for, not ahead of time anyways.
Yeah, and we got some reports that are coming out, like you mentioned, today one of them. I guess, what are we looking for there? What signals will tell us in terms of what things to watch out for? The sort of getting the signal from the noise.
Yeah, so certainly the expectations are to see the U.S. beef cow herd 2.5% smaller than last year. That's kind of what's in the market, if you will. So we'll see what the report says. We'll also be watching to see, look for revisions, USDA revisions to prior years. If you recall what happened with the hog report at the end of 2023, and lots of revisions back a couple of years. So that's always kind of, was something we weren't expecting. So anyways, we're looking for a smaller cow herd because we simply haven't seen any retention of heifers going on, whether we're talking about the U.S., whether we're talking about Canada. And why do we know that, or how do we know that? We just continue to see big heifer placements. Earlier in 23, looking for that signal we'll be watching for as we go through 24, start to see if those heifer placements start to slow up, meaning maybe that some start to stay in the herd. But guess what's got to happen before any of that? We've got to listen to Matt Makins and the weather guy and find out what's going to go on with moisture. That precipitates all the rest of this.
Yeah, it was interesting. That's another conversation in here. I've been talking to a few of my friends from the Northern Plains, sitting in the media room here, and it's the same boat. There's desire to, I would love to buy. I heard this morning, I would love to buy 100 new cows. Trouble is, I need grass to sustain that, and so that prevents that from happening. We're going to be interviewing Matt Makins. We're going to have that, of course, on the website, but that really is holding us back.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's not year one. I mean, many of us are, 3 going into potentially year 4 of drought. And if you're in some of the areas, and I don't know if you've talked to anybody recently, Shaun, in terms of the water situation for southern Alberta, all those pieces are huge in terms of what goes on. So that's going to be a key point because we can't keep those 100 cows until we get the grass. And it's not a one-year thing. We've now been stuck in this one for a while. So we need a big change.
How's the feed yard feeling right now?
Not good. We went from 2023 on average being a pretty good year. I know at the end of the year it ended up with some negative margins, but it came off as one of the best years, and then we've kind of flipped it right on its heads. We've come into some high break-evens, and of course the market's stalling out. And if you're in Western Canada, the market's actually come off a little bit from where it was before we ended 23. So we've gone from one extreme to the other. So granted, it's the front end of it, but we've got some high break-even cattle to get through.
And that's with corn pulling back considerably. Are we still? Were a lot of them hedging feed way out in front? Do we still have some expensive feed that we're getting through these cattle?
Everybody's different, but certainly some of that was going on where you bought what you needed to get through the winter season for 23-24, or a percentage of it anyways. So there's going to be some of that impact for sure. But going forward, certainly the sign of last year's record corn crop, very comfortable stocks to use ratio. I think we'll hear that from Cattle Facts, when they do their update on Friday. So those will be some of the positives that I think are going to be great support if you're listening to this as a cow-calf or a stocker operator. Great support to feeder cattle and calf prices in 24, but margins on the feedlot level, I think that could be a little different story than 23.
Yeah, and Canada's still pulling a lot of feeder cattle north, is my understanding.
Yeah, we won't beat 21's. We don't have the December data in yet, but we won't beat, in my opinion, 21's record, but we'll be awfully close to the second biggest. So let's call it around 300,000 head is what I expect when the final data comes in. In 21, it was 377,000 head, but still, it's a big import. This is obviously a supply of feeder cattle on an ongoing basis for Western Canadian feedlots, period.
Yeah. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm curious. As we were talking here, I thought of something where in cropping, we're like, oh, this reminds me a lot of 84. Or with weather, we're like, oh, yeah, because Matt Makins will probably say, and I'm making up years here, but he's going to be like, yeah, 1989, 90, 91. We reference years. When you think back on your career as a cattle analyst, is there a time that this reminds you of? From a cycle perspective, when we had strong supplies, really questionable margins at the feed yard level, and demand feels somewhat like it's sort of like on not quicksand, but it's sort of like it's shaky ground.
Well, the last cycle would have been the 2015 cycle in terms of cattle number lows in terms of the U.S. lows and high cattle prices in terms of that relationship. This one doesn't feel quite so. In terms of timing, that would be what fits the best. But at the same time, that was a very quick cycle, made a bottom, kept heifers, the rain came, replaced the heifers quickly. So this one's different. Certainly supplies have tightened, but we're still dealing with weather issues, so we haven't retained the heifers. So this one feels different from that perspective. And probably if you look at from the peak in 2019 in terms of the U.S. cattle cycle to where we sit today, we've had a pretty big drawdown in numbers, way more than we've seen in recent cycles. So this one feels a little different in terms of it's deeper in how much we're cutting back supply. The question on demand, though, is still in everybody's mind. I don't know how you compare that one to historically. Demand levels are still relatively good. Yeah, they're not as good as 21 and 22, but historically, these are still pretty good demand levels. So I think that's something to keep in the back of your mind.
Well, based on some of the price discrepancies between beef and pork at the store right now, thank goodness beef tastes so good.
We have a lot to lean on there, and I think that producers need to remember that, right? I mean, quality, taste, tenderness, all those things have really gotten us where we are versus previous cattle cycles where I think, especially if you go back 20 and 30 years ago, where we were really struggling on the quality front.
Well, you're no longer president of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. What do you do with all your time now?
Oh, there is so much to do here. Trust me. I still go to the meetings because, once you've got an interest, whether it's markets, whether it's sustainability, whether it's weather, whether it's politics, whether it's trade, you still go to the meetings. It's always interesting to get an update on what's going on, whether you're sitting at the executive table or just here as a producer.
Trade, that's one, of course, that's talked about a lot here. And you and I have been talking about the importance of keeping up that export demand for not only the Canadian industry, but also the U.S. industry. With the coming 2026 CUSMA USMCA trade renegotiation, it's not a big topic of discussion here, but the 10% tariff that's being talked about, what would happen if there was a 10% tariff on all Canadian live cattle going south or beef going south? What would that do to the market?
Well, Shaun, we've learned many times before, whether we go back to BSC, whether we go back to mandatory country of origin labeling. I mean, any time some thickness, whatever it might be, occurs at that border, it is immediately and equivalently the discount to Canadian cattle or beef. So that one's a no-brainer. It has a direct and immediate, and when supplies get out of balance, even more than a direct discount. But it's clearly what happens to the entire Canadian beef industry. It's not just that piece that's being exported, it's the entire Canadian industry.
Yeah, I'm always reminded when I come down, this is one of my favorite meetings of the year, and people are going to be like, oh, you say that about every meeting. But this one, I really, really enjoy this meeting, the Cattle Con, the NCBA convention. And one of we're day one here, and one of the very, very quick reminders is just the integration. Somebody walked up to me and said, hey, Shaun, how's it going? I listen to you all the time. Hey, how's the grass conditions up there? It's a rancher from North Dakota, right? So I think it's just that reminder about how integrated the flow back and forth through the supply chain, not just finished product, but through the supply chain, just how, and you include Mexico in that too.
Yeah, and now, of course, we're talking about feeder cattle, we're talking about fed cattle, we're talking about beef. So the integration is clear. It moves both directions, as we have identified, depending on what flows where, east-west. We supply the beef in the west, and it flows south, and in the east there are deficits, so it flows north. So it's an evolving situation, 365 days of the year, and that's been the way for a long, long time.
You gonna get time while you're down here in Orlando to hit Disney World?
No.
Well, you don't have the grandkids with you.
No grandkids on this one. Just an anniversary tomorrow.
That's right. Congratulations. 11 years.
Yes.
Good. That's, awesome. Congratulations to you and Barry. Happy anniversary. No better way to celebrate it than here at NCBA Cattle Convention. So, and thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's great to do this in person.
I loved it. This was great. Thanks, Shaun.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Okay, we'll be right back on RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, right after this.
Co-op knows your community because we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. And we're giving back. In the past 5 years, Co-op has invested over $1.1 billion in the prairies through building, upgrading, and expanding local facilities. And we've returned over $1.17 billion to Co-op members in the prairies. Co-op, we're all building something for the future. Here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm.
When you see how fast Intruvix 2 herbicide from FMC smacks down narrow-leaved hawksbeard, volunteer canola, kochia, and those other problem weeds, you'll be saying, stronger and faster. Shut the front door. Apply it with glyphosate before planting cereals, and you'll enjoy cleaner fields faster while protecting your future glyphosate use. Cheese and crackers. Just how easy can you get? Intruvix 2 herbicide from FMC. Clean is good. See your local retailer.
Protecting your nitrogen is smart. And a nitrogen granule with a polymer coating that releases in response to conditions that promote plant growth? Well, that's me. I'm the environmentally smart nitrogen granule that gives the nutrition crops need when they need it, reducing nitrogen loss and increasing nutrient availability. Imagine feeding me to your fields. Me. Now, wait a minute. Hey, can I rethink this? ESN Environmentally Smart Nitrogen Fertilizer. Learn more at smartnitrogen.com.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, broadcasting here from the NCBA Cattle Con Convention in Orlando, Florida. We're keeping up on all things happening in the North American cattle industry, the markets and trade and the consumer. Lots being discussed here this week, of course. Hey, ran into Nathan Phinney. He is chair of the Canadian Cattle Association based out in the Maritimes. Hey, Nathan, how's it going?
Good, Shaun. How are you?
Good. Okay, where's the home ranch again?
Just outside of Moncton, New Brunswick. I'm pretty much on the New Brunswick-Nova Scotia border.
And moisture conditions at home. You're more on the wet side than, especially comparatively speaking to some of the cattle producers out in Western Canada, but almost too much moisture at sometimes, right?
Yeah, we have. This year has been almost flood year. I speak to my Western counterparts and wish we could figure out a way to pipeline some of that water out west to even things out. But yeah, we've been having too much water and has made cropping very difficult this year.
Well, we can't get energy pipelines built in Canada. Maybe a moisture pipeline. That would be nice. Okay, so for you, I'm sure this is a very, very busy week. There are some of your counterparts, of course, from the U.S. and as well as Mexico. What are you trying to accomplish in a week like this?
Yeah, we have a couple of big files that we're working on. Obviously, one of the big one is the voluntary product to U.S. that we're having meetings on and collaborating with, our U.S. and Mexican counterparts. Trade, obviously, for our industry is the main focal point. Without trade, we don't have a sustainable industry, and the amount of dollars that trade brings into our industry is it's the foundations of what we're built on. So focusing on some of these trade barriers and some of these trade issues, we really have to recognize, and I hope our policy makers from all three countries in North America realize that we have the largest beef integrated system on live cattle and in the world, and that is important to realize, and we need to maintain that if we're looking to be global leaders.
Yesterday, as always at this meeting, this isn't, I think some of this goes back in time. There was probably an original reason for the meeting to happen, but it's continued. The trilateral meeting between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. Is that the main part of focus? Is how do we hold this integrated system together? Like, what's the purpose of that meeting?
I think that meeting in itself has really shown the value of collaboration and how well we work when we work together. A couple of years ago, or last year, I guess I was at the meeting, we put out a joint letter to our trade and ag ministers and secretaries in our respective countries, stating that North American production system is leading the world in sustainability and production and food safety, and that's what we're going to adhere to. When we feel outside pressures coming from across the pond at times of certain greenwash ideas, that may be fine in their situation, but it's not what we do here in North America, and we do it as well as anybody. So we use that forum as a platform to collaborate on international issues and stand together as a continent on what it is we do.
You mentioned across the pond. We're seeing, especially from a Canadian, not as much in the U.S. here, but from a Canadian perspective, any time that I hear that, well, this is the way that Europe's doing it, I just sort of cringe, I get a little itchy. It just sort of makes me like, that I don't know, that's not, and maybe that's being a little bit too close-minded from my standpoint, but boy, I think history kind of shows that that's not necessarily the path we want to follow in regards to some of these protocols and things.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to have good trade policy and good regulation, they need to be science and rules-based. And we feel like that's the foundations as well that our industries in North America are built off of, science and rules-based. And if the science shows that we're doing something inaccurate or wrong, we as an industry adopt that and we make the changes to make sure that it's fundamentally sound. Some of the ideologies and the political atmospheres in these other countries and the pressures that they're feeling doesn't necessarily align itself with science. And our message has been strong and clear that if you're going to have good trade policies, regardless of the governments of the day and respective countries, that's the foundations that you need to build it off of and hold those to those standards. So that's where we're coming at this as a North American side of things is, if the science shows we are wrong, we will fix it. But as it stands, we are leading the globe in the sustainability side of things and in healthy and safe food production, and that's what we're going to hold ourselves to.
Is CCA, supportive of what's happened and with the issue with the UK on the trade talks, where the UK's walked away from Canada. There's been big time frustration trying to get Canadian beef products into the UK, into the EU, period. Are you supportive of the position in the federal government, how they're approaching this, or does something need to be changed up?
I thank our government for taking a hard line on this. This stems back to an ongoing issue for quite some time that we haven't got resolved. And, it is disappointing to see the UK walked away or paused, I guess, the negotiations. We would like to see them get back to the table and obviously come to a solution. But however, in saying that, a lot of this is built around our food safety system, which every other country that we trade with recognizes that and has told us that Canadian flag and maple leaf on the front of the package has a set of standards, and and that is the marketing tool that we need, knowing what our product comes from and it's safe. And we are not about to jeopardize that and lower those standards to adhere to another country's wishes.
Is the issue to do with carcass washing, or is the issue to do with implants? What's the UK's gripe? What are they throwing our way, whether it's legit or not?
Yeah, both issues are on the table. For us, it's the biggest sticking point right now is carcass washes. They don't want to recognize that we use the system that's approved, and if there is going to be such a niche market of a hormone-free market, it's irrelevant if we can't send the product there because of our carcass wash and our food safety system. So what we'd really like to see is that get dealt with. As far as implants, the science is behind them; they're safe. And on a sustainable side of things, when you're knocking 60 days off of production, there is science that backs that up. That there is positive reasons to use those. If that's their prerogative that they choose not to have them, that is fine. But like I said, allow the consumer to be the ones to make the decision. They will righteously say whether they approve something or disapprove something, and not run it through the political realm.
Yeah, very good points. Now, before we wrap up here, are there any particular points that CCA is coming down here with to make sure you're educating is probably the wrong way, but when you're talking to some of your American counterparts where it's like, hey, we want to make sure that you guys understand where we're coming from on this. Maybe it's a point of disagreement, or because there's lots of things that NCBA and CCA do agree on, but are there some points that you're making sure you're hitting home this week?
Yeah, the voluntary product to U.S. is the big one. Mexico has similar concerns as we do. The intent of the legislative being proposed, we understand what the intent is and the reasons behind it, but the overall consequences that potentially could come after this are the unknown. And what we're really fearful of is, as I stated earlier, we are the largest integrated beef movement nation in the world as far as the North American market, and we do not want to have any regulations in place that potentially could jeopardize that. We're at a point where there's been droughts, in the U.S. and in Canada, and we all know that our critical mass is down. We need to be able to move those cattle freely where feed is available. We need to be able to move those cattle back to where processing is available to keep our critical infrastructure rolling. So for us, we're really concentrating on that. And then obviously, one of the points that we will be watching if this does cross the finish line in the U.S. is any sort of segregation or injury. That gets us back to the WTO days where, we were really concerned about origin of labeling. And even though it's voluntary version of cool, the unintended consequences that may come out of this are something that we could become reality, and we'll have to address.
It's similar on Prop 12. If you're when you have some sort of segregations, let's just pick on a plant like, say, Pasco, Washington, and there's Canadian live cattle going down to that plant. If you have to segregate, potentially that plant has to make a decision and say, well, how badly you could potentially, even though it's voluntary, you've forced a decision on them to say, well, we're not taking Canadian cattle anymore, and that is could be very, very harming to the Canadian side of the border. I'm not sure that's exactly what American producers want. Obviously, they're going to have their opinion on this, but there is a lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah, it's the unknown of the unknown. Until this gets in place, we won't know how, processors will react. We don't know how consumers will react. We don't know how much this will gain traction or what it'll overall look like. Maybe there'll be no uptake, but if there is uptake and we see that, that's the concerning part. Is we don't know the unknown right now, and we're fearful that there's any sort of jeopardization of the way we all collaborate and work together in this cattle market. The threats are real, and that's why we're down here working as hard as we are, trying to make sure that we limit any of those risks.
Back home on the ranch, how are things looking for this upcoming year? You optimistic?
We would love to have control over Mother Nature's. Markets are strong. Our trade is strong. I don't think it's ever been stronger. We're working on the Indo-Pacific deal. Strategy that the federal government has put in. We've attended trade missions South Korea, in Japan. We're heading back to South Korea. That's where the growth is in our trade and the value. So if we get a little moisture out west, and adequate weather across the rest of the country, should be a growing herd kind of phase, and that's something we haven't seen in since '89. So I think all signals are there. We are in winter. There's always optimism as a farmer of the next growing season. So hopefully we get what we need and continue to prosper.
Well put, Nathan. Well put. Well, hey, enjoy yourself. Hopefully you get a chance to enjoy some of the nice winter weather here in Florida. Their version of it. Come here in the summer and you'll. That's a whole different kind of summer, but enjoy this beautiful weather, and I know you got lots of meetings and things happening here, so all the best to you. Good luck, and we'll chat with you again soon.
Thanks, Shaun. Anytime. It's always a pleasure.
Time is running out to register for the 2024 Crop Connect Conference. Join us February 14th and 15th at the Victoria Inn and Convention Center in Winnipeg, Manitoba for insightful speakers, crop-specific information, networking, and more. Register today at cropconnectconference.ca. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM right after this.
If you have a growing list of questions about getting more from your fields, know that Koch Agronomic Services has an answer for every acre. With a full spectrum of nutrient management, nutrient protection, and seed enhancement options, Koch Agronomic Services offers a deep portfolio of agronomically effective products, each designed to enhance yield potential, all available to help solve your problems. Find the answer that's right for your acres. Start by visiting kochag.ca. That's KOCH ag.ca.
Whether you're in a career within an organization, starting your own business, looking for your dream job, running your own farming operation, operating a company in ag or food, or want to hone your overall life skills, this conference is for you. Celebrating over 10 years of bringing women in ag together, join the Advancing Women Conference in Calgary on March 17th, 18th, and 19th. Visit advancingwomenconference.ca for more information and to register.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 at Sirius XM. We're at the NCBA Cattle Con Convention here in Orlando, Florida. I ran into this is kind of an annual thing. I do this once a year. I get to run into Don Close. He is with Terrain. Don, great to see you again.
Good to see you as well, Shaun.
Okay, lots happening in the cattle markets. Yeah. Globally, it's kind of a really, really disruptive time. Do you have your finger on how we're going to look back on 24?
I don't know that anybody has their finger on how 24 is going to be with so many potential landmines out there. So I think the safe way to answer that question is we will continue to see a tremendous amount of volatility, specifically on the export markets.
That's concerning to me, though. Because, a lot of times we focus on the domestic consumption. And right now we're putting a lot of pressure on the consumer to pay a lot for beef. Now, they've come through for the most part. There is obviously some warning signs out there, but we can't afford to have any sort of a slowdown in the export markets. Where do you see this volatility really, really taking hold?
Two things I would say on that one. The first off, we did in fact see a very measurable slowdown in U.S. beef exports in 2023. So we've got the brunt of that pill behind us already. with that said, there's still some very bright spots out there. You know, the total trade volume of protein we've got going with Mexico is nothing, pork specifically, but nothing short of amazing and continues. A real growth area for U.S. beef exports is Central and South America, and while those countries aren't the huge, the China, Southeast Asia, but collectively it makes for some real tonnage. So I think there's still some bright spots. As complicated as the China situation is, I think we jump to a conclusion that it's all going to end tomorrow or very soon, and that's simply not the case. And you still look at 1.3 billion people, and the percentage of that 1.3 billion that would categorized as high or very high net income people. I think there'll be business with China. It just probably won't be as robust. Now, we brought in the domestic side of it, and when we look at real per capita expenditures on beef, or on all species. So essentially we're taking the monthly volumes times the monthly retail price and deflating that to get a net dollar expenditure for beef. So instead of talking a nebulous index number, we're looking at total dollar numbers. Those numbers are nothing short of amazing. Demand for beef is still very, very good. Dave Weber has done with Terrain has done some work, and we're even taking those total beef expenditures monthly, breaking that down by quality grade, and looking at where beef is going by grade, and it's really exciting work. But what we're seeing with that is, again, whether we look at it by under a specific quality grade or if we look at beef in the aggregate, we're not seeing any damage to total beef demand. In fact, if you compare beef with the total expenditures to both pork and broilers, you can actually say beef is holding its strength at the expense of specifically chicken. So in spite of the uncertainty of the domestic economy, the recession or the inflationary impacts, the higher interest rates, what we've seen so far is it has not been the detriment to consumer spending that is feared.
Yeah, that's on a dollar basis, yeah. Not on a tonnage basis.
No, that's on a dollar, a combination of tonnage times price, so a net dollar value.
What are some of the other things that you're paying close attention to right now, Don?
We're like everybody else. We're holding, anxiously waiting the release of the cattle inventory numbers this afternoon. No doubt they're going to be smaller, but we'll continue to watch just what weather conditions are by region and what that will enable us to stabilize and even start to look at rebuilding some female numbers. We put a lot of emphasis on that heifers as a percent of the total on feed mix. That was a part of the January cattle on feed report, that heifers on feed is the fourth largest we've had under the current cattle on feed series. So I think that by itself tells a very compelling story that we're not retaining heifers as of yet because we couldn't have that many on feed.
Yeah. But we would retain more heifers, though. It's the grass situation. It's Mother Nature on the western side of the United States. It's the same story in Western Canada. Until we get a sustained change in the weather pattern that ranchers can rely on and say, okay, the signal's there, like the market signal's there, but Mother Nature's not giving a signal.
No, they're absolutely correct. I mean, just in with the storms of the last 2 weeks, certainly you've seen a lot of moisture across parts of Nebraska. You've seen really good rain just the last 2 weeks, basically along the entire coast of California, so seeing some improvement there. As I talk with producers in the southern plains of Texas and Oklahoma, they tell me, we've had some moisture of small rains, a quarter-inch rains that's been very supportive to winter wheat pasture, but they've yet to have the deep soaking rains required to recharge that grass. The one other point that I would bring up, and just the recent round of weather, we had massive rainfall, in the 5 to 7 inch category, Louisiana and across that southeast complex. That was really the hub of cow liquidation during the second half of 2023. So with that area getting the rain that it's had, I think once it dries out enough to start doing anything about it, we'll see some improvement there.
Yeah, and all of this, we're hoping that it leads to better margins for not only the rancher but the stocker and of course the finishing yards.
The real challenge for all margin operators in this market environment, short supplies, the cost of feeder cattle or all classes of cattle are going to stay high. So the one thing the producers like to hear the least, but the importance that they have on managing cost and monitoring where they're at with margins, it's just we're at that point in the cycle and it has to be dealt with. The opportunities, I don't think, certainly look at calf prices throughout last year. I don't think the price is necessarily prohibitive, but I think it's the age demographics of producers. I think the interest rate environment is a way bigger challenge than when we looked at expansion back in 14 and 15. Age of producers. Yeah. So I think there's a number of factors here that have to be evaluated, but the big one has been Mother Nature just simply hasn't provided that opportunity.
Yeah. When we look, you mentioned China earlier and some of the ups and downs there from a U.S. export perspective. Where's China getting the beef from? Is it coming from Australia or is it coming from Argentina, Brazil? How is the U.S. losing out there?
All of the above.
Okay. Okay. Well, you know what? When you don't know in multiple choice, you just take D, all of the above.
Excuse me. They're doing an ever-increasing volume of business with Brazil. But during 2023, China and Australia has had kind of a on-again, off-again romance. And as Australia went through a severe drought through certainly the first half, or late 22 and the first half of 23, that they were aggressively harvesting animals. That drove down prices, and that was the incentive for China to come back in and for them to play nice. So more and more Australian product is going to China and Southeast Asia. More of the New Zealand product is going to China as well.
And transport, you look at the distance between Australia and China and North America and China, there's definitely a freight disadvantage here.
Huge freight advantage. There's also a way not to say excessive, but a way larger share of direct Chinese investment in properties and in processing that have those linked relationships with Australia and China.
And that's the kind of relationship that makes us a little bit nervous here on this side of the globe, right? Pushing back on some of that investment, or are we too reactive to that?
I believe we are too reactive to that, and here's why I say that: the U.S., the quality product that the U.S. produces, and we've seen a sizable increase in the percentage of Australian slaughter that would be categorized as fed beef. But even with that said, the U.S. is in such a unique position to be the high-quality beef provider to the world. And we're not going to lose that, we're not going to lose that status anytime soon. So if we have to make any adjustments at all, it might push us further down the road to being the specialty market or the niche supplier, but have marketing that have an industry that's designed for specific end users and with end use specifications. And I think we'll see more of that and less of a commodity mindset.
Don, before I let you go, I'm curious. There has been talk. Again, yesterday I saw some reports about for former President Trump. One of his campaign platforms is a 10% tariff on all goods coming into the U.S. He does not seem to be somebody that's a fan of carve-outs, so to speak. What kind of impact would that have on North American cattle and meat and beef trade?
It's not going to help.
I feel like you're kind of understating that, Don. I don't know. We only see each other once a year, but that to me feels like a little bit of an understatement. But you clarify.
Okay. Where my follow-up statement of that is that opens the door to retaliatory tariffs from our customers. And certainly the market of choice in most of those cases would be on U.S. ag products. So if we start, there's so much water going to roll under the bridge between now and election time that, who knows. But I do think, if this is the reality, I think that the complications with global trade will likely get more intense before it gets better.
Yeah, it's going to be a long election season, like 185 days, Don. That is a long time. Okay. Well, Don, it was great to see you again. Enjoy the rest of the Cattle Con, and talk to you again soon, man.
Always good to talk with you. See ya.
Great stuff. That is Don Close. He is with Terrain. I do want to mention MMP. You deal with many uncertainties on your farm. Managing risk should not be one of them. MMP's ag team specializes in risk management. Visit mmp.ca to learn how you can stay ahead of the game and plan for the unknown. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio from Orlando, Florida, right after this.
CDC Endure is a new oat line from Alliance Seed. High yielding with excellent disease resistance and the quality end users ask for, all in one great oat variety. CDC Endure provides the high beta-glucan levels to make heart-healthy products like breakfast cereals. For more information on CDC Endure oats, as well as any other products from Alliance Seed, check out allianceseed.com or visit any Alliance Seed authorized retailers.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground. We are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, broadcasting here from the Cattle Convention, the NCBA meeting in Orlando, Florida. We're going to get to the top ag news stories of the day. But first, I want to mention Co-op. Co-op knows your community because we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. Co-op, here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at co-op.crs/farm. Top ag news stories today. I did mention Product USA a little bit earlier on in the show. So a review of the USDA Product USA labeling plan continues at the OMB. The National Meat Institute, the NMI, has already had a session with the Office of Management and Budget on USDA's final rule for putting in place a voluntary Product of the USA label. Their session involved officials from the USDA and the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative and likely focused on the issues raised by NMI in the comments they filed during the request for public comment on the proposed rule released in 2023. There was also a session with Canada detailing their position on the final rule via Edward Farrell. Now, who is he? He's a lawyer with the OFW law firm in Washington, D.C., who actually advised the Canadian cattle industry back when they did the WTO challenge of U.S. country of origin labeling program that Canada won in that decision. So definitely following that one close. And as we've been talking about, that's a big part of the discussion here this week when it comes to trade matters between Canada and the U.S. Now, we know that the drought is bad in Alberta, but a regional agency in Alberta has banned oil and gas operations from using treated water as a severe drought is parching Western Canada, and it's leading municipalities to prepare restriction plans. The Mountain West View Regional Water Services Commission owns and operates the Anthony Henday Water Treatment Plant on the banks of the Red Deer River, northwest of Innisfil in central Alberta. Earlier this month, it passed a motion to suspend water being used for fracking. And I wonder if we're going to see this happen in more counties, in more municipalities. That story from the Globe and Mail. Speaking of oil, this is from the Wall Street Journal. For years, Canada's booming oil fields have had few choices to funnel the country's thick tar-like crude oil through pipelines snaking through the Midwest to the Gulf Coast. That has pushed down prices paid by many U.S. refineries and, in turn, gas stations and airports from Minneapolis to Chicago to Detroit. Wall Street Journal reports that, quite frankly, those days could be numbered. Now, why? Because the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, which will nearly triple the capacity of existing pipeline from 890,000 barrels a day, promises to give Canadian companies more pricing power and boost the country's position as a global energy powerhouse. It's a pipeline that is going to be 715 miles and is going to give Canada access to the Pacific Ocean for exports. Of course, the Trans Mountain pipeline is the pipeline that also the federal government purchased to try to save it under much controversy. A group of lawmakers in the U.S. has expressed concerns about rising transportation costs due to the Houthi attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. They have called for swift action to address these issues and have written a letter to several Biden administration officials emphasizing the need to prevent disruptions to the nation's supply chain. China reports human death from bird flu. This is not good news. China on Wednesday reported the death of a 63-year-old woman due to an infection of mixed H3N2 and H1N5 avian influenza. The woman was from a province that she died on December 16th due to the severity of the disease. The outbreak is an episodic cross-species transmission from bird to humans, according to the National Disease Control and Prevention Administration. The risk of the virus infecting people is low, and no human-to-human transmission has occurred, was also added to the report. So that not very, very, very good news. I think what we're going to continue to hear this week at the cattle convention is the importance and the connection of the integration, so to speak, of the North American beef chain. And there obviously is differences, and there are things that Canada and the U.S. do not agree on. But when it comes to beef, there's a lot in common, and there's a lot of trade that goes back and forth. And we were talking about with Ann Wasko a little bit earlier. I think what really is just emphasized with me being here for really only day one here so far is that a reminder of that integration as we talk about feeder cattle flows back and forth. We talk about feeders, stockers going back and forth across the border. We talk about fat cattle going back and forth across the border, and of course box beef as well. As Canada is one of the largest purchasers of U.S. box beef as well. So that integration still continues today to hold strong. So I'm sure that any sort of differences will be worked out, and it's going to. I think, like I've said before, it's going to be very, very important. I think for North America, Canada, the U.S., and Mexico to think a little bit more strategically as an economic trade zone, more so than they have in the past, especially with all the volatility and the issues that are happening in other parts of the world. Where we can cooperate, I think we really should be more so than ever based on what is in front of us. That's my feeling. You can send me your feedback on that. What do you think? shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course you can find us across all the different social media platforms, or of course you can always call that RealAg feedback line 855-776-6147. Reminder, tomorrow is going to be the Farmer Rapid Fire as usual, brought to you by Pioneer Seeds Canada. And then on Friday, we will not have a RealAg Issues panel. We'll have our show from the Alltech trade show booth here from Orlando, Florida at the NCBA CattleCon convention. So that's going to be a lot of fun as well. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we will chat again tomorrow. Cheers everybody from Orlando, Florida.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by new Intruvix 2 herbicide from FMC. New Intruvix 2 herbicide for cereals delivers outstanding control of the toughest broadleaf weeds like volunteer canola, narrow-leaved hawksbeard, and kochia. See your local retailer for more information today.